The kingdom of Vortia couldn't be in a better position. Building giant towers? Check. Becoming a kingdom of the gods? You know it. Expanding to new lands? Wait, what? Find out what's in store for Vortia as I play 800 Days of Kingdoms and Castles. Check out the previous videos before this one if you haven't already. Link down below. 700 years have gone by. This kingdom has fought off King Banta, Queen Mazenberger, and so many different Vikings I can't even count. It's finally time to relax a little bit and focus in on developing the kingdom itself. It honestly might not seem like there's a lot left to do. Well, there is. Two of the biggest projects that we need to work on is walling off the Isle of Vortia and finish walling off Greater Vortia. The reason that these projects need to be done is that if we want to expand to new lands, we need to be able to defend our current lands even when our troops are away. And I definitely know that the Vikings will always come and knock on our doors. So, having a wall around all of our islands and preventing them from being able to land or even deal any damage would be the best bet to keeping the kingdom safe. Speaking of those devils, look who it is. To further prove my point about the Vikings, it looks like the Isle of Vortia is about to be invaded by a whole bunch of them. The thing is, if the whole island was walled off, like Vortia, then we wouldn't have to worry about the Vikings landing and getting free access to raiding our houses, food storages, and other buildings. Well, I think I hyped myself up enough. Time to get building. The Isle didn't have enough resources to instantly build a complete wall, along with a whole bunch of docks. So I currently needed to defend it with other means. You know what that entails. More ballistas and archer towers. Oh yeah. You know, I'm a little confused. King Banta sometimes had his moments, and sometimes he didn't. Now my question is, why did he build 4 Norias right next to each other? That just makes no sense. You really only need one, and it can be further in on the island. It also looked like he was blocking off a stone source. Maybe he did have quarries here, and I just destroyed them, but things just looked very inefficient. So I rebuilt it in what seemed like a neater fashion. I also then placed down only one single Noria, and connected it to some aqueducts to power the bathhouse that was nearby. This might have seemed like a waste of time, but honestly, organization really can help sometimes, and King Banta was definitely the opposite of that. That last Viking invasion also inspired me to fortify my weak points on the island of Vortia. Even though it seemed like the walls were already big enough, it never hurts to make them bigger, because the Vikings were only going to get bigger themselves, and there was also going to be a lot more coming soon enough. It can be really hard to design a very nice looking city sometimes. So I went to Vortia for inspiration. I started checking out what I did on this island, so that way I could replicate it on the Isle of Vortia. Surely enough, some dragons ambushed the isle out of nowhere. We did take them out very quickly, but unfortunately some buildings caught on fire, and 2 peasants died. Real quick, if you're enjoying the content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for more. Although it might not seem like a lot of people, 2 is a number that could have been prevented, if only we had stronger defenses. Well, I know how to solve that problem. Wait, what the heck? The Vikings are here again? They just attempted an invasion a few years back. How can they afford to attack so soon? I guess it's beyond me. The only thing we have to worry about now is defending the cities. Oh my gosh, this is not looking good. Vortia was taking heavy damage to the main walls. And that wasn't even the main forces of the Vikings. The Isle then started to get swarmed by them. This was a moment that I feared for quite a long time. A whole bunch of enemy troops landing and having free reign to pillage the Isle. My catapults were a little bit slow to react, my archers were a little bit faster, but they still weren't able to make it in time. The city had sustained a decent amount of damage just from the ogres who were marching their ways halfway across the island. I had ordered all of my builders to start focusing on repairs. That way, once the ogres were handled, we could have everything back up and running in the snap of a finger. This last invasion once again reinforced the urgency of getting a wall around the Isle of Vortia. If it doesn't get built soon, and a larger army this time attacks the isle, the whole island could basically be destroyed. I'm sure my defenses would be able to kill most of the Vikings, but at what cost? It wouldn't be worth having to repair the whole island. What the heck? There's a food shortage on Greater Vortia. How is this even happening? What's going on? I guess regardless of what was going on, I needed to start building some more farms. So that's exactly what I did. I placed down around 16 wheat farms, and then I planned on placing a few windmills, but I didn't have the supplies for it. I had also noticed a spot where I could place another 8 farms. This should at least start stabilizing the food issue that was going on the island. Nice, that's good progress. One issue that I had overlooked with my wall and dock approach was that the fishing huts would now be blocked off from sending their boats out into the ocean. So I started creating little canals with sea gates so that way they could get in and out. I then started building some graveyards near the cathedral on Greater Vortia. It seemed pretty fitting, but then at the same time I decided that a garden would look a lot nicer. And we already had a decent amount of graveyards scattered throughout the city. So building these gardens would increase the happiness of the people around and make things look a lot more aesthetically pleasing. Talking about being pleased, I really wasn't. The reason being is that the Vikings started to invade again. This time, there were over 50 of them. I needed to make sure that my defenses were prepared for this. And of course, on Greater Vortia, the giants had made their way into my city after destroying some of the new walls. This was a little bit concerning. When checking on Vortia, things seemed like they were pretty chill. Back on the Isle, it seemed like the invasion was just beginning, so I didn't know how things were going to end up. In Greater Vortia, the Vikings did make their way into the city, but they weren't able to do too much with it. We were so close to finishing off the wall around the Isle. I just needed to wait for the docks to be completely finished, and then I could place the actual stone walls on top of them. It was time to do a quick little audit to make sure that all of the walls were complete. Unfortunately, I found one little gap where there was a hole. So of course I had it filled. It also seemed like an appropriate time to start building the dock walls on Greater Vortia. We had just finished on the Isle, so now I could use the resources over on Greater Vortia. It seemed like Greater Vortia and the Isle of Vortia were hogging a bunch of my time. So I headed back to the mainland and started looking at what I could build. It seemed like the land near the witch hut was going through a drought. So I placed down a Noria connecting to my water reserve so that way the land could start to flourish. I don't know how I forgot to do this a while back, but as you can see, there are consequences for forgetting to hydrate all of the lands. I couldn't place any new farms on them, and I even needed to destroy some of the older farms, or at least wait until the land gets a little bit more fertile. Dragons! Oh wait, never mind, they're not that bad. It seemed like the dragons were a lot less effective at destroying cities than the Vikings. Now that's just a little bit embarrassing, because when you think of dragons, they're supposed to be these strong creatures that could destroy absolutely anything with their fire breath. Apparently not these dragons. What the dragons were lacking in, the Vikings made up for. Another invasion began, and this time, it looked like there was a huge amount of Vikings all clumped together. On Greater Vortia, the ogres had breached one of my walls. This wasn't unusual, but it was annoying because they destroyed one of the manors after breaking into the kingdom and getting killed. There was also a pesky catapult that was sitting on the coast just taking out the walls one by one. I guess that was revenge for what I did to Queen Mazenberger. I had a similar strategy. It's definitely annoying when someone does it to you. While I continued building, I had started to think about settling in new lands. We had now owned 3 islands in the Kingdom of Vortia, and we could only expand from here. Just the only thing is, there are no new lands. Maybe if we set up some ships to head out and search for some, we could find them. Unfortunately, this would cost troops and also a bunch of settlers. So I needed to make sure that I was fully prepared to send off some of my own people and troops and that they weren't needed at the islands. I started to destroy some of King Banta's poorly placed housing areas. It didn't make sense at all, the type of structures he had there, so I honestly just ended up wiping them all out. I probably should have done this at a slower rate, just because a lot of people started to get displaced and didn't have a home for a short period of time while the houses were constructing. This caused a huge drop in happiness. People actually started to leave the Isle of Vortia because of this drop. Some more dragons had flown their way into our lands. There were 3 this time, a little bit more than usual. That didn't mean that they were going to be an issue though. Once again, we had taken all 3 of them out with not even a scratch on any of the castles. The dragon had died on some empty land. I knew that I could utilize it, so I decided to build some more graveyards as there were already currently some nearby. I had also gone to check on the land that earlier was going through a drought. It no longer was, and I could now place a whole bunch of wheat farms here. So that's exactly what I did. Oh no, not again. 2 pretty large fleets had made their way over to my islands. It was pretty cool because I got to check out my new defenses on the Isle of Vortia. It seemed like there was 1 ship with a catapult, and all of the ships that didn't have catapults started to bunch up. They weren't doing any damage to my walls, so I really didn't have to worry about them. And once the ship with the catapult was taken out, it seemed like the enemy boats were just sitting along the coast taking arrows from my towers. This strategy honestly was 100% foolproof. Completely walling off my isle made it so that way it was impenetrable, as long as we took out the catapult ships. The food situation had finally stabilized on Greater Vortia. I no longer needed to rush placing down more farms. I did, however, destroy a small water reservoir and built a big one. The reason being is, yeah, I know the large ones take up a little bit more space, but they also provide a significantly larger water coverage on the lands. Time really started to fly by as I traded with some merchants, expanded my agricultural areas, and started to fight off another Viking invasion. This one was a little bit different. I had walled off most of Greater Vortia, and it seemed like a lot of the Viking ships had been fooled into waiting outside of some of my walls. Their catapults weren't able to do any damage to them, and a lot of the ships were just taking heavy fire for no reason. There was a group of enemies that landed on the docks and started dealing damages to the walls. I called these the Smart Vikings. Too bad the rest of their forces were messing around, sailing into a wall rather than destroying them. As I was upgrading some of my ballista towers, making them a lot taller, I had forgotten that I had one that was incredibly large. So I decided to try and go and expand it even more. This resulted in me getting an achievement from expanding the tower super high. The range on this thing is insane. Too bad I didn't have it this tall when I was fighting Queen Massenburger. I honestly ordered the tower's construction to be way too tall. So I decided to take off quite a few levels and then add in 3 ballistas once I was satisfied. This way, that area of the map would be completely secure if any ships were sailing by. They would almost instantly be taken out by 3 ballista shots. While I was surveying the islands, I had noticed that the happiness on the Isle of Vortia was pretty low. So I hosted a feast in the name of all of the knights who had passed away while serving. This immediately raised happiness, and the levels were becoming a lot more stable again. I'm gonna have to talk to whoever constructed this wall. That is incredibly off. It was about time for the usual dragon sighting. This time, there were only two of them. The first one had made its way over the Isle of Vortia and was immediately eliminated. When I tried to see where the second one was at, it was already falling to the ground, dead. The Kingdom of Vortia definitely has the best defenses. If we had just killed off the dragons, that meant that the Vikings were coming soon, and they sure did. Quite a few of them once again got caught up on the Isle of Vortia. They were sailing into the wall like nobody's business. The catapult ships had been taken out, and I had a few archer towers just lighting them up. I even tried constructing some more to make them get killed a lot quicker. Even the extra tower didn't speed up things very much, so I had sent over a bunch of catapults and archers to assist. Back on Greater Vortia, I started to cut out a little path in between the trees on the peninsula part of the island. I definitely wanted to expand over here, but I needed to keep a lot of trees on this side of the island. It was very important to make sure that there was an area to collect wood on every island. So that was going to be the tip of the peninsula. The newly cleared out zone would be for agriculture and of course housing. There really wasn't too many other areas on any of the islands where I could build more housing. So I needed to make sure that it was utilized correctly. Honestly, the Isle of Vortia needed to be worked on the most. All of the buildings were placed in the most weirdest configuration. They could have been placed a lot better, but that's going to be a mission for another time. Honestly, we had things down to a science. Most of the Vikings when attacking would get stuck on my walls. This was incredibly overpowered because all of the ships would just sit there and wait to be destroyed. They couldn't really do anything though, as there wasn't really a place to land. Well, I guess there was, but they were apparently too lazy to sail over there. I then continued to make huge improvements on my walls, finished building up the new neighborhood, and started to place down some more agricultural buildings. While I was managing some transport ships, I had been informed by one of my advisors that the Kingdom of Vortia was now recognized as the Kingdom of the Gods. The reason being is that it expanded so large, and the quality of life here was so good, that everybody in all of the lands nearby wanted to live here. I guess that explains why the Vikings are always wanting to attack and take over these lands. They're jealous, and they want them for themselves. When I had gotten that information, it made me so happy. We had started off as a small little village, and now look at us. We were being recognized as the Kingdom of the Gods. There was no title that was more honorable than that, especially for a kingdom. It was at this point I had realized the kingdom had become so strong, it could now fend for itself. It would definitely make sense to expand into new lands. I just needed to prepare some ships with some people on it so that way we could head over and start some new settlements. Of course, right when something good happens, there always has to be something bad that counteracts it. A Viking invasion had began, so I started to talk to the witch and told her to take care of it while paying her in gold. All of the Vikings were struck with lightning and all of the ships that they were sailing on had sunk in the sea. I didn't have to deal with any of them. I started to get into my thoughts, and it was honestly a little bit sad. I had recognized that the islands of Vortia no longer needed me to micromanage their every movement. I was honestly thinking about the Great War with Queen Mazenberger, the really fast war with King Banta, and back when I only had one single island. Times have really changed, and it was honestly a good time to expand the kingdom into new lands. Maybe we could even become an empire at some point. But I knew I was needed wherever we were going. The people here would suffice without me until I returned. Before I left, I wanted to make some last-minute arrangements. I guess you could call them improvements. I continued construction on a neighborhood I had started building a while ago, placed a few more farms in Greater Vortia so they never have a food shortage again, and fought off some of the last dragons for a while. Those dragons entailed my last Viking invasion, too. Of course, my defenses had it on lock. The Vikings started to make some very weird moves after getting fried by my Greek fire towers. They started doing the same thing that they always do, and started riding up against the wall, hoping that they'll get in. Well, boys, it's now or never. Off to new lands.